Welcome back to the channel. Jesus said, "The truth shall set you free." But what truth was he really talking about? For 2,000 years, churches have taught you that truth means believing the right doctrines, following the right rules, and accepting the right theology. But Joel Goldsmith discovered something that changed everything. The truth Jesus spoke of is not a belief system. It is a revelation about your true identity. Most people pray for God to change their circumstances, to heal their bodies, to fix their problems. They beg, they plead, they bargain with the divine. But this approach keeps you in spiritual bondage because it is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. You are treating God as separate from yourself, as an external power that might or might not respond to your requests. Joel Goldsmith realized that Jesus was revealing something far more radical than a better prayer technique. When Jesus said, "The truth shall set you free," he was pointing to the truth of your consciousness. The truth is this: you aren't human beings seeking God. You are the presence of God expressing as your individual existence. This is not a metaphor or philosophy. This single realization transforms everything. When you truly understand that your consciousness is divine, consciousness individualized, you stop begging for healing and start recognizing the perfection that already exists. You stop asking God to become present and start acknowledging the presence that has never been absent. This is what sets you free. The bondage Jesus spoke of is not your circumstances. It is your belief in separation from the divine source. Every problem you experience stems from this one fundamental error: thinking you are separate from God, that you must somehow bridge a gap, earn favor, or convince a distant deity to intervene in your life. This belief creates your suffering. Joel Goldsmith called this the world of appearances. You see lack, disease, conflict, and limitation all around you. These appearances seem so real that you react to them, fight them, try to manipulate or change them. But fighting appearances only strengthens them in your experience. You cannot fix an illusion by treating it as real. You must see through it. The truth that sets you free is recognizing that these appearances have no power, no reality, no substance apart from the belief you give them. Your divine consciousness is the only presence and the only power. When you realize this deeply, not just intellectually but as a living experience, the appearances begin to dissolve. This is not positive thinking or mental denial. This is spiritual realization. It is seeing what is eternally true rather than what appears to be temporarily real. Joel taught that spiritual healing happens not by changing conditions but by changing consciousness. When your consciousness shifts from belief in separation to recognition of oneness, your entire experience transforms naturally. Here is where most spiritual seekers get trapped. They understand the principle intellectually. They can explain that God is all, that consciousness is one, that separation is illusion. They read the books, attend the lectures, and memorize the metaphysical truths, but their lives do not change. Their problems persist. Their freedom remains theoretical rather than actual. Joel Goldsmith discovered why knowing truth as information is completely different from realizing truth as experience. You can know that ocean water is salty by reading about it, but until you taste it, the knowledge remains abstract. Spiritual truth works the same way. You must taste the reality of your divine consciousness through direct inner experience, not mental comprehension. This is what Joel called attaining the consciousness of truth. It requires daily practice of moving beyond thoughts about God to the actual felt presence of divine consciousness. It means learning to be still enough that the mental chatter stops and the deeper awareness emerges. This awareness is not something you create or generate. You simply stop blocking it. When you practice this recognition consistently, something remarkable happens. The truth stops being something you think about and becomes something you live from. Your consciousness shifts from human reasoning to divine knowing. From this consciousness, the truth literally sets you free because you are no longer imprisoned by false beliefs about yourself and your source. Let me be clear about what this freedom actually looks like. It is not that you suddenly have no challenges, no lessons, no growth experiences. The freedom Jesus and Joel Goldsmith spoke of is freedom from fear, anxiety, and struggle. That comes from believing you are alone, vulnerable, and separate from infinite good. It is freedom from the mental prison of limitation. When you realize your true identity as divine consciousness expressed individually, you stop living in reaction mode. You stop feeling victimized by circumstances, manipulated by others, or threatened by conditions. Not because you develop a thick skin or learn to cope better, but because you recognize that nothing external has power over the infinite consciousness that you are. This recognition takes practice. Joel emphasized that spiritual realization is not a one-time event, but a deepening awareness that unfolds through dedicated inner work. Some days the truth feels clear and present. Other days the old beliefs seem to reassert themselves. This is normal. The key is a consistent return to the practice of recognition, the habit of remembering your true identity. As this awareness deepens over weeks and months, you begin to notice tangible changes. Situations that once triggered anxiety now leave you peaceful. Problems that seemed insurmountable now resolve naturally. Relationships that were conflicted now harmonize. Not because you manipulated outcomes, but because your consciousness changed and your experience reflects your consciousness. Joel Goldsmith shared the story of a woman who had suffered from chronic pain for over 15 years. She had tried every medical treatment, every alternative therapy, every healing modality available. Nothing worked. The pain was her constant companion, limiting her life, stealing her joy, defining her existence day after day. She came to Joel not because she believed he could heal her, but because she had exhausted every other option. She was desperate but also deeply skeptical. Joel did not pray for her healing. He did not lay hands on her or perform any ritual. Instead, he sat with her and began teaching her about the truth of her identity as spiritual consciousness. At first, she resisted. She wanted healing, not philosophy. She wanted relief, not lessons about the divine consciousness. But Joel persisted gently, helping her understand that her pain was not the problem. Her belief in separation from wholeness was the problem. The pain was just the symptom of that fundamental misunderstanding about who and what she really was. Over several weeks, something shifted in her consciousness. It was not a dramatic moment, but a gradual awakening to the truth that her body was not her identity, that pain was not her reality, that the infinite consciousness of God was expressing as her true being. As this realization deepened, the pain began to diminish, then disappear completely within 2 months. What happened to that woman was not a miracle in the traditional sense. It was the natural result of consciousness recognizing its true nature. Joel explained that when you stop identifying as a limited human body, subject to conditions, and start identifying as divine consciousness, expressing the conditions have no choice but to align with that higher identification. This is spiritual law. But here is what makes this different from positive thinking or mental techniques. The woman did not deny her pain. She did not visualize herself as healed. She did not try to convince herself that the pain was not real. Instead, she learned to rest in the awareness of her true identity until that awareness became more real to her than the physical sensation. This process took time. Some days she felt the truth clearly. On other days, the pain seemed to dominate her awareness, and she questioned whether any of this was working. Joel encouraged her to persist, not in fighting the pain, but in returning to the practice of recognition. Recognition of what? That God is the only presence, the only power, and the only reality of her being. The healing unfolded as her consciousness shifted. It was not instantaneous, and it required her daily commitment to the practice of moving beyond appearances to truth. But when the healing came, it was permanent. Why? Because it was not a physical healing, it was a consciousness healing. She had realized the truth of her being, and that truth set her free from the bondage of physical limitation. Another case Joel documented involved a businessman facing financial collapse. His company was failing. Creditors were demanding payment. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable. He came to Joel in panic, asking for prayer to save his business, to bring in sudden clients, and to somehow manifest money miraculously. His desperation was consuming him, stealing his sleep, destroying his peace. Joel did not pray for business success. Instead, he taught, "This man applies the same principle. God is not a cosmic vending machine, responding to desperate prayers for material supply. God is the infinite consciousness of abundance that is already expressing as your true being." The problem was not a lack of money, but a lack of recognition of the ever-present divine supply. The businessman struggled with this teaching. He needed practical solutions, not spiritual philosophy. He had bills due, employees depending on him, and a family to support. But Joel persisted. Your consciousness of lack is creating your experience of lack. When you shift to consciousness of divine abundance as your true reality, Your outer experience must reflect that inner shift. This is not magic but spiritual law. Over the following months, the businessman practiced what Joel taught. He learned to stop the anxious mental calculations, the fearful projections, the desperate scheming. Instead, he practiced resting in the awareness that infinite intelligence and infinite supply were expressing as his consciousness. Gradually, opportunities began appearing. New clients emerged. Creative solutions manifested. Within 8 months, his business had completely turned around. What both of these cases reveal is that the truth Jesus spoke of operates at the level of consciousness, not circumstance. You cannot think your way to freedom. You cannot mentally manipulate your reality. But when you realize the truth of your divine identity deeply enough that it becomes your living consciousness, everything in your experience naturally aligns with that realization. This is how truth sets you free. The businessman later told Joel that the greatest gift was not the business recovery. It was the freedom from fear. Even during the darkest financial moments, as he practiced recognition of his true identity as divine consciousness, he found a peace he had never known. The anxiety that had ruled his life for years simply dissolved in the presence of this deeper awareness. This is what Joel Goldsmith spent his life teaching. Freedom is not about getting what you want. Freedom is about realizing who you are. When you know yourself as the presence of God individualized, and you stop begging for supply, health, or happiness, you recognize these as the natural expression of your true being. This recognition does not happen overnight, but it does happen through consistent practice. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others discover these teachings. Subscribe for more. Joel Goldsmith wisdom and comment on which aspect of divine consciousness most challenges your current understanding. Now let me share with you the specifics. Practice Joel Goldsmith used to move from knowing truth intellectually to realizing it experientially. He called it the practice of recognition. This is not meditation in the traditional sense of emptying your mind or achieving a special state. Recognition is the active practice of acknowledging what is already true about your divine identity until that truth becomes your living consciousness. Here's how Joel taught it. Find a quiet place where you will not be disturbed. Sit comfortably but alertly. Close your eyes and begin by releasing the day's concerns, the mental chatter, the endless planning, and problem solving. Let your mind settle like a snow globe that stops being shaken. This settling creates space for deeper awareness to emerge naturally. Now comes the recognition practice itself. Silently acknowledge these truths. God is the only presence where I am. God is the only power operating in my experience. God is the only reality of my being. Do not say these as affirmations trying to make something true. Recognize them as what is already true, has always been true and cannot be otherwise. Feel the difference between affirming and recognizing. As you practice this recognition, thoughts will intrude. The mind will wander to problems, plans, memories, and distractions. This is natural. Do not fight the thoughts. Simply notice them and gently return to the recognition. God is the only presence, the only power, the only reality. Each time you return, you are strengthening your consciousness of truth. This is the practice that changes everything over time. Joel emphasized, this practice should be done at least twice daily, ideally in the morning before the day begins and in the evening before sleep. Morning practice sets your consciousness for the day. Evening practice releases the day's accumulation of false beliefs and returns you to truth. Consistency matters far more than duration. 10 minutes of genuine recognition is more powerful than an hour of mental wandering. But here is where most people stumble. They practice recognition for a few days or weeks and expect dramatic results. When circumstances do not immediately change, they conclude the practice does not work and abandon it. Joel warned against this impatience. You are reversing years or decades of consciousness conditioned in separation, limitation, and fear. The reconditioning to truth takes time and persistence. Think of it like learning a musical instrument. The first days of practice produce awkward sounds, not beautiful music. But if you persist, gradually your fingers learn the patterns, your ear develops and music emerges. Naturally, consciousness works the same way. At first, recognition feels forced, intellectual, artificial, but with consistent practice it becomes your natural way of being. Truth becomes your default consciousness. Joel also taught a complementary practice he called the listening consciousness. After your act of recognition, Sit in silence and simply listen inwardly, not for words or messages, but for the felt presence of divine consciousness. Most people spend their lives in mental noise, never experiencing the deeper awareness that exists beneath thoughts. This listening practice opens you to the direct experience of your true identity beyond concepts. Another powerful technique Joel shared is what he called taking no thought. Jesus said, "Take no thought for your life, what you shall eat or drink, what you shall wear." Most people interpret this as reckless irresponsibility, but Joel revealed its deeper meaning. Taking no thought means not engaging in the anxious human reasoning that assumes you are a limited material being struggling for survival in a hostile universe. Taking no thought is recognizing that infinite intelligence is already governing your life perfectly. You do not need to figure everything out, control every outcome, or plan every contingency. This does not mean you become passive or irresponsible. It means your actions flow from divine guidance rather than fearful human calculation. There is a profound difference between these two ways of living. Practice this technique. When you notice yourself caught in worried thinking, mentally rehearsing problems, or trying to manipulate solutions, stop. Recognize that you are engaging human reasoning based on the belief in separation. Then consciously take no thought by releasing the problem to infinite intelligence, not as prayer asking God to fix it, but as recognition that divine wisdom is already handling it perfectly. This feels risky at first because you are so accustomed to controlling through mental effort. But as you practice taking no thought, you discover something remarkable. Solutions appear that you never could have reasoned your way to. Opportunities open that your planning never anticipated. Life flows more smoothly when you stop trying to be the infinite intelligence and start letting infinite intelligence express through you naturally. Joel also taught the practice of witnessing throughout your day. As you encounter people, situations, and circumstances, practice witnessing them from your consciousness of truth rather than reacting to appearances. When you see someone is sick, do not reinforce the appearance by treating them as a sick person. Silently recognize that God is the only reality of this person's being. Their true identity is divine consciousness, whole and perfect. When you face a challenging situation, do not engage it as a problem to be solved through human effort alone. Witness it from truth. God is the only power here. Divine intelligence is already resolving this perfectly. No appearance has reality or power apart from the belief I give it. This witnessing does not deny practical action. It changes the consciousness from which you act. The witnessing practice trains you to live from truth rather than appearances. At first, you will forget and fall back into reacting to conditions as if they are the ultimate reality. This is normal. The key is catching yourself and returning to the witness perspective. What is the truth here? Not what appears, but what is true. God is the only presence, power, and reality. Everything else is a temporary appearance. As you combine these practices, recognition, listening, taking no thought, and witnessing, you build a consciousness of truth that gradually becomes your natural way of being. This is not about perfecting a technique. It is about shifting your identity from human limited self to a divine, infinite self. This shift is what sets you free, exactly as Jesus promised. The truth of your divine consciousness, realized and lived, is your freedom. Now let me address the obstacles you will encounter on this path, because Joel Goldsmith was honest about the challenges. The first and most persistent obstacle is doubt. Even as you practice recognition and begin to understand the truth of your divine identity, a voice in your mind questions whether any of this is real. Is this just spiritual philosophy? Am I deceiving myself? How can I be divine consciousness when I still struggle with problems? This doubt is natural and actually indicates you are taking the practice seriously. If you felt no doubt, you probably have not grasped how radical this truth really is. The doubt comes from your conditioned human consciousness, which has spent years or decades identifying as a limited material being. That old identity does not surrender easily. It fights for its survival by generating doubt about the new awareness emerging. Joel taught that you do not overcome doubt by fighting it or trying to convince yourself through mental argument. You overcome doubt through experience. Each time you practice recognition and feel even a moment of peace that surpasses understanding, you are having a direct experience of your divine consciousness. These moments accumulate. Gradually, your own experience becomes more convincing than your doubt. But you must be patient with yourself. Some days the truth feels clear and present. On other days, the doubt seems to dominate. This fluctuation is part of the process of consciousness transformation. The key is not achieving a permanent high state, but consistently returning to the practice regardless of how you feel. Your faithfulness to the practice matters more than your emotional experience of any single session. The second major obstacle is what Joel called the desire for phenomena. People want dramatic spiritual experiences, miraculous healings, instant manifestations. They measure their spiritual progress by outer results, rather than inner transformation. This desire for phenomena actually blocks the deeper work of consciousness change. Why? Because it keeps you focused on effects rather than causes, on circumstances rather than consciousness. Joel emphasized that spiritual realization is not about acquiring power to manipulate your world. It is about recognizing the truth of your being so completely that your world naturally reflects that truth. The focus must remain on consciousness, not conditions. When you practice recognition to get healing, supply, or harmony, you are still operating from the consciousness of lack, trying to become abundance. This reinforces separation. The paradox is that the less you focus on changing circumstances and the more you focus on realizing your true identity, the more your circumstances naturally transform. But this requires a genuine surrender of the desire to control outcomes. You must want truth more than you want results. You must care more about knowing your divine identity than about manifesting specific conditions. This is spiritual maturity. Many people abandon the practice when they do not see quick outer changes. Joel warned against this. The transformation happens at the consciousness level first. Sometimes it takes weeks or months of practice before you notice outer shifts. But every moment spent in recognition of truth is building a consciousness that will eventually express as transformed experience. Trust the process even when you cannot see immediate results. The third obstacle Joel identified is what he called taking on the world's beliefs. Every day, you are bombarded with messages that reinforce the consciousness of separation, limitation, and fear. News reports declare lack, disease, conflict, and danger. Conversations revolve around problems and complaints. Social conditioning teaches you to identify as vulnerable material beings, subject to random circumstances and external powers. If you are not vigilant, these world beliefs infiltrate your consciousness and undermine your recognition practice. You spend 30 minutes in the morning recognizing God is the only presence and power, then spend the rest of the day absorbing messages that contradict that truth. Your consciousness becomes divided, trying to hold spiritual truth while simultaneously accepting material appearances. As ultimate reality, Joel taught that you must guard your consciousness. This does not mean isolating from the world or denying practical realities. It means consciously choosing what you accept into your consciousness. When you hear news of a disaster, silently recognize that God is the only presence and power. When someone complains about limitation, silently know divine abundance is the only reality. You are not denying their experience but refusing to accept their consciousness. This guarding of consciousness requires constant vigilance, especially in the early stages of practice. But as your consciousness of truth strengthens, you become less affected by world beliefs. You can live in the world, engage with it practically, but not be of it spiritually. Your consciousness remains anchored in truth regardless of appearances. This is living from the inside out rather than outside in. The final obstacle Joel warned about is spiritual pride. The subtle belief that your realization makes you superior to others who have not yet awakened to these truths. This pride is particularly dangerous because it seems spiritual on the surface. You are not proud of material achievements but of spiritual understanding. Yet pride of any kind, material or spiritual, indicates you are still operating from the separated ego consciousness. True spiritual realization is humble because it recognizes that there is only one consciousness, one presence, one being expressing as all. If you are the presence of God individualized, so is everyone else. The person who seems spiritually asleep is still divine. Consciousness simply not yet aware of its true identity. Your realization does not elevate you above them. It allows you to recognize their divinity even when they do not. Joel taught that genuine spiritual awareness expresses as compassion, not judgment. When you truly realize your divine identity, you naturally see that same divinity in all. You cannot look at another person with condescension because you recognize them as the same consciousness you are. The moment you feel spiritually superior, You have fallen back into ego consciousness, pretending to be in spiritual realization. True realization dissolves all sense of separation. If you recognize these obstacles in your own spiritual journey, like this video to support others facing the same challenges, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith teachings on consciousness transformation, and comment. Which obstacle currently tests you most and how are you working through it? Now, let us explore how this truth consciousness operates in advanced practice when you face situations that seem genuinely threatening or impossible to resolve. Joel Goldsmith shared a powerful example from his own life. During World War II, he received a letter from a young man drafted into military service. The man was terrified, certain he would be killed in combat, consumed by fear day and night. Joel did not respond with platitudes or false reassurance. He did not tell the young man to think positive thoughts or affirm his safety. Instead, he taught him this practice several times each day. Stop whatever you are doing and recognize this truth. I am not in a body that can be harmed. I am divine consciousness which cannot be destroyed, diminished, or threatened. My true identity is God expressing as my individual being. This is the truth of what I am. The young man practiced this faithfully throughout his deployment. Joel told him that the practice was not to create safety but to realize the truth of his indestructible spiritual identity, whether his body remained safe or not. His true being could never be touched by external circumstances. This recognition brought him profound peace even in the midst of combat situations. He lived not because the practice protected his body, but because his consciousness shifted from fear to peace. This example reveals the advanced understanding of Joel's teaching. The goal is not to manipulate circumstances to your preference. The goal is realizing your true identity so completely that even threatening circumstances cannot disturb your peace. You are free not when conditions are perfect, but when you know yourself as consciousness that transcends all conditions. This is the freedom Jesus promised. This is what truth delivers. Another advanced application Joel taught involves relationships. Most people experience relationships from the consciousness of need. You need love, approval, companionship, and validation from others. This need consciousness creates dependent, conflicted relationships because you are constantly trying to get something from another person and are you trying to get something from yourself? Both people are operating from a lack consciousness, and lack attracts more lack. When you realize your true identity as divine consciousness, everything changes. You recognize that you are already complete, already whole, already filled with the infinite love that you are. You need nothing from anyone because you are the fullness of all. From this consciousness, relationships become about giving rather than getting, about recognizing divinity in the other rather than extracting something from them to fill your emptiness. Joel taught this practice for relationships. When you interact with anyone, spouse, child, friend, colleague, or stranger, silently recognize I am not looking at a limited human being. I am witnessing divine consciousness expressing as this individual. Their true identity is the same infinite presence that is my true identity. We are not two separate beings trying to get along. We are one consciousness appearing as apparent multiplicity. This recognition transforms relationships gradually. You stop being triggered by others' behaviors because you see beyond the behavior to the divine reality. You stop trying to change people because you recognize their perfection at the consciousness level. You stop feeling hurt or rejected because, your completeness does not depend on anyone's opinion or treatment. This is relationship freedom, and it emerges naturally from consciousness of truth. Joel also applied this consciousness to work and career. Most people approach their work from consciousness of earning a living, competing for resources, protecting their position, or proving their worth. This consciousness creates stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction because it is rooted in the belief that your survival depends on your personal efforts and that resources are limited, requiring competition with others. Truth consciousness recognizes that infinite intelligence is expressing as your life work. You are not a limited person trying to succeed in a competitive world. You are divine consciousness, individualized, and that consciousness naturally expresses as right activity, abundant supply, and perfect opportunity. Your work is not your source. God consciousness is your source, and your work is simply one avenue through which that infinite supply flows. Practice this in your work life before important meetings, challenging projects, or stressful situations. Take a moment for recognition. Infinite intelligence is the only mind operating here. Divine love is the only presence in this interaction. God's perfect plan is already unfolding. I am not personally responsible for making something happen through my limited human ability. I am the avenue through which infinite wisdom expresses perfectly. This practice does not make you passive or lazy. Paradoxically, it often makes you more effective because you act from inspiration rather than desperation, from wisdom rather than fear, from confidence rather than anxiety. Your work becomes an expression of your divine consciousness rather than a struggle to survive. This shift in consciousness changes everything about how you experience your career and what you accomplish through it. Perhaps the most advanced application Joel taught involves what he called living the mystical life in the midst of the world. This means maintaining your consciousness of truth not just during meditation or spiritual practice, but continuously throughout your day as you engage with all the practical demands of human life. This is where spiritual realization becomes not a separate activity, but your way of being. The mystical life is not about withdrawing from the world to maintain your peace. It is about being so established in your true identity as divine consciousness that you can fully engage with the world without losing your center, without being pulled into the consciousness of separation, limitation, or fear. You live in the world, but from a different consciousness than the world operates from. Joel practiced this constantly, even as he traveled, taught, counseled individuals, and managed practical affairs. He maintained an inner awareness of God as the only presence and power. He taught that this continuous recognition becomes easier over time until it operates almost automatically, like breathing. You do not have to constantly think about recognizing truth. Your consciousness simply rests in truth naturally. This is the ultimate freedom. You are not dependent on circumstances being perfect to maintain your peace. You are not thrown off center by challenges or problems. You move through life from an inner stability that comes from knowing who you are at the deepest level. This is living from truth, and this is what sets you completely free, exactly as Jesus promised 2,000 years ago. Now, I want to address something crucial that Joel Goldsmith insisted upon. This teaching is not about denying your humanity or pretending you have no challenges. You still have a human experience. You still face situations that require practical action, wisdom, and sometimes professional help. The difference is the consciousness with which you meet these situations. You meet them as divine consciousness expressing in human form, not as a limited human struggling alone. Joel was clear that spiritual realization does not replace common sense, medical care when needed, or responsible human action. It transforms the consciousness from which you approach these things. You go to the doctor if appropriate, but you do not give the condition ultimate reality or power. You take practical action to resolve problems, but you do not believe the problem has power over your divine identity. You engage the human while knowing the spiritual. This balance is essential. Some people use spiritual teaching to avoid dealing with practical realities. They refuse medical help, ignore financial responsibilities, or neglect relationships, claiming they are living from a higher consciousness. Joel called this spiritual bypassing, and it is not genuine realization. True consciousness of your divine identity makes you more responsible, more compassionate, and more engaged with life, not less. Other people get so caught up in handling the human details that they forget the spiritual foundation entirely. They live as if they are only material beings subject to material laws, and they wonder why spiritual teaching seems irrelevant to their real life. The mystical life Joel taught integrates both. You are divine consciousness and you have a human experience. You honor both without confusing them as you deepen in this practice over months and years. Joel promised that certain markers indicate a genuine transformation of consciousness. The first marker is increasing peace that is not dependent on circumstances. You notice that situations that once triggered anxiety now leave you calm. Problems that seemed overwhelming now feel manageable. Not because the problems got smaller, but because your consciousness got larger, more spacious, more established in truth. The second marker is what Joel called the fruit of the Spirit. Your life begins to demonstrate more harmony, supply, health, right relationships, and opportunities without you striving or manipulating. These appear naturally as your consciousness shifts. You are not making them happen. They are the natural expression of your realized consciousness. This fruitage is not the goal but the evidence that consciousness has changed. The third marker is genuine love for all beings, not forced niceness or spiritual politeness, but authentic recognition of divinity in everyone you encounter. You find yourself less judgmental, more compassionate, more patient with others' humanness because you see their divine reality beyond their temporary behavior. This love is not emotional sentimentality. It is consciousness recognizing itself in all forms. The fourth marker is what Joel called the listening consciousness becoming constant. You find yourself living in a state of inner listening, inner awareness, inner connection with the presence that you are. This is not something you have to create through effort. It becomes your natural state. You are established in your identity as divine consciousness, and that identity informs everything you think, say, and do. Joel Goldsmith spent his life proving that Jesus' promise is not a religious theory, but a spiritual reality. The truth does set you free when you understand that truth is not doctrine, but consciousness. The truth is the recognition of your identity as a divine consciousness individualized. When you realize this truth deeply, not just mentally, but as lived experience, you are freed from fear, lack, disease, conflict, and all the bondage that comes from believing you are separate from God. This freedom is available to you right now, not someday when you become more spiritual, not after years of study, not when you finally deserve it now, because the truth of your divine identity is not something you achieve. It is something you recognize. It has always been true. You have always been the presence of God expressing as your individual being. You simply did not know it. The knowing is the freedom. Everything Joel taught comes down to this simple practice. Recognize the truth of your divine identity consistently until that recognition becomes your consciousness. Practice recognition in meditation. Practice it throughout your day. Practice it when facing challenges. Practice it in relationships and work. Practice taking no thought, witnessing from truth, and listening to the presence within. These practices build the consciousness that sets you free. The journey is not always easy. You will face doubt, obstacles, setbacks, and challenges. Your old consciousness will resist the new awareness. But if you persist with these practices, if you faithfully return to the recognition of truth, regardless of appearances, your consciousness will transform. And as your consciousness transforms, your entire experience of life will reflect that transformation. This is the promise Jesus made, and this is the promise Joel Goldsmith proved true. So what happens when you truly understand what Jesus meant by the truth shall set you free? You stop being a victim of circumstances. You stop feeling powerless, anxious, and separate. You stop begging an external God to save you from your problems. You recognize that you are the presence of God individualized, and from that consciousness you live in freedom regardless of conditions. This is the greatest discovery you can make in human life. Your transformation will not look like anyone else's. Your path will be unique because you are a unique expression of the one infinite consciousness, but the principles are universal. Recognition of your divine identity, practiced faithfully, transforms consciousness. Transformed consciousness naturally expresses as transformed experience. This is spiritual. Law as reliable as any physical. Law and available to anyone willing to practice. Joel Goldsmith gave the world this gift, the practical understanding of Jesus' mystical teaching. He proved through his own life and the lives of thousands. He taught that consciousness transformation is not theoretical but achievable. The truth does set you free. Not belief in truth, not knowledge about truth, but realization of truth as your living consciousness. This realization is your birthright, your destiny, and your freedom. Begin today. Start the practice of recognition. God is the only presence where I am. God is the only power in my experience. God is the only reality of my being. Recognize this truth morning and evening. Practice taking no thought when anxiety arises. Witness from truth rather than reacting to appearances. Listen for the presence within. Do this faithfully and watch your life transform as your consciousness transforms. If your understanding of Jesus' promise has been transformed through these Joel Goldsmith teachings, like this video so others can discover this freedom. Subscribe for more consciousness-changing content and comment. I am divine consciousness to declare your recognition of truth. Your transformation begins. Thanks for watching.